On the 25th of February 1979, the Russian Kiev-class warship Minsk passed through the Turkish Straits into the Mediterranean. Classed as a cruiser, the Minsk was nonetheless an aircraft carrier. But its comparatively small size and total commitment to vertical takeoff aircraft did give Western analysts a chance to study the Soviet thinking on naval aviation. Clearly, Russian strategists did not see the need for large carriers able to support a variety of aircraft types. American thinking, on the other hand, has gone towards the development of massive carriers. Often nuclear-powered, these, the largest of man's mobile creations, are able to convey and support several different types of aircraft. They provide the US with the option of sending its potent air power to areas where it does not control ground airstrips, as was the case in various stages of the Second World War, Vietnam, and more recently Libya. The American attack carrier can only be perceived as the ultimate gunboat. But if air power is to provide the weapons, then it also became the risk. Up to 5,000 lives and an almost irreplaceable amount of technology girthed in one steel hull, these vessels must be the most inviting target for any aerial attack. That this is not the case is almost entirely due to one remarkable aircraft, the Grumman F-14 Tomcat. America's involvement with carrier forces is greater than any other nation. It was aircraft from the Japanese Carrier Task Force that devastated Pearl Harbor and actually guaranteed US participation in World War II. It was only from the deck of the carrier Hornet that Doolittle was able to lead the B-25 retaliation attack. And although this did little effective damage, it did break the myth that Japan's homeland was beyond Allied reach very early in the conflict. The Coral Sea battle again proved the potency of the carrier-launched aerial attack. But it was Midway that was to prove the greatest carrier-against-carrier conflict. It was also the American victory to set the trend for the remainder of the war. But if Midway was to show the strength of carriers, it also demonstrated that they were vulnerable to the very type of aircraft they carried. And since that time, it has always been the threat of aerial attack that has been uppermost in the minds of carrier commanders. By the mid-1950s, the principal threat to American carrier forces still came from the air. Russia had developed particularly long-range maritime reconnaissance bombers, such as the Tu-20 NATO-designated Bear. With massive turboprop engines driving counter-rotating propellers, it was not fast compared with fighters of the time. But it could carry supersonic anti-ship missiles, which could be launched with devastating effect on any potential surface target. Against this combination of long range and high speed, the US Navy had to completely rethink the role of its fighter aircraft. To counter the Soviet threat, the Navy had to develop a very specialist aircraft. Not a fighter in the tradition of previous conflicts, rather a long-range all-weather interceptor. To fill this role, and do so well, McDonnell developed the F-4 Phantom. The Phantom, a massive plane for its time, was to provide the speed, the altitude, and the range that would keep missile-carrying aircraft at a safe distance. But its most important feature, and a break from previous convention, was the use of 2 crew members. The second crew member providing radar and other information to the pilot. The pilot's role was to merely get the aircraft as close as possible to its prey, because the F-4 was designed around one other unique concept, that of having no armament other than its radar-aimed missiles. The Phantom not only proved a useful Navy aircraft, but it was also adopted by the Air Force for a variety of fighter, reconnaissance and ground attack roles in Vietnam. But whilst it was often successful against enemy MiGs with its Sidewinder and Sparrow missiles, it had to be upgraded with a cannon for close encounters with the lighter Russian-made fighters, which were invariably more agile and hence extremely dangerous. Intelligence data gathered on the improvements to Soviet cruise missiles and their use from not only above but also below and on the surface continued to worry US naval strategists, who knew from their own experiments the devastating effect this new type of weapon could cause. They asked the obvious question: could an anti-missile weapon be developed? Hughes Weapons Division thought so. They offered the AIM-54 Phoenix missile, which, although having the disadvantage of being large and heavy, could, if required, actually lock on to another missile, even at a range of 50 miles. The problem now was to find an aircraft that could lift it and still fly at speed and over long distances. But for some time, just such an aircraft had been contemplated by Defense Secretary McNamara, who would also require it to perform the tactical fighter role. The ambitions of his scheme are shown here.
The United States Air Force, the United States Navy, one new aircraft for both services. Tactical Fighter Experimental, the new TFX, a program under executive management of the Aeronautical Systems Division. Designated as F-111, both versions will have a full-scale mock-up inspection late this summer. The present Navy mock-up is joined here by the Air Force version. Principal differences in the two airframes are in the forward fuselage, the landing gear, and the wing tips. The shorter forward fuselage on the Navy version accommodates a folding radome for carrier deck spotting. The station geometry, provisions, escape subsystems, and oxygen system are the same in both cockpits. Controls, displays, and instrument systems have been made common wherever practical. When the wings are folded back, a near optimum configuration for high-speed, low-drag supersonic flight is produced. The F-111 is capable of carrying, launching, and ejecting all required air-to-air and air-to-ground missiles, nuclear bombs, and conventional bombs. The Air Force version can carry extra outboard pylons on each wing for subsonic use. They are jettisoned before the wing is swept back. The strake and inboard wing pylons are usable in either the extended or swept wing position.
The TFX project, although mainly the brainchild of General Dynamics, subcontracted most of the Navy's F-111B model work to Grumman Aviation. The 111B, now a multi-role fighter, had to be able to accommodate the massive Phoenix missile. However, because the basic design was to provide a medium tactical strike bomber, the overall concept resulted in an aircraft that the Navy considered far too heavy for carrier use. Even though several successful firings of the enormous Phoenix missile were achieved, by the time this rare footage of the Navy's version of the TFX was shot, the project was already abandoned and the carrier trials a mere formality. The principal problem of the 111B was the program's inability to reduce the aircraft's weight below 80,000 pounds. There were also shortcomings with the undercarriage and the general lack of pilot visibility on deck landings. However, at no stage was the Navy, with its specialist needs, in any way optimistic about adopting the 111B as a fighter, when in every other way it was an Air Force bomber. By the late 60s, the Defense Department knew the Navy required a replacement for the now aging Phantom, as information becoming available indicated that Russia was about to produce land-based swing-wing fighters with a superior performance. The problem was adequately summarized in 1969 by Admiral Connolly.
There is the ever-present threat from surface to surface or surface to air missiles, from either shore stations or missile-carrying Soviet ships. The basic problem is that our stable of Navy fighters to meet these threats is rapidly losing its edge. Our F-8 Crusader was started in late 1952, over 15 years ago. It became operational 11 years ago. Our F-4 was a clearly superior fighter when it became operational in 1961. Now the gap is closing. It is a tribute to the skill of the nation's fighter pilots that a high kill ratio has been maintained in Vietnam. We cannot depend on maintaining this margin indefinitely. The time has come to equal the skill of our fighter pilots with a far superior fighter aircraft, one that will be superior now and for the next 15 years.
Fortunately, Grumman, with their vast experience gained from the 111B, had already strived to produce a suitable defense fighter to fill the void described by Connolly. Grumman experimented with a wide variety of models and weapon formats to try to produce a concept that could both act as a dogfighter as well as fleet defense fighter. Their Model 303 clearly fitted the requirement. Benefiting from lessons learned in the 111, the new aircraft was to rely upon expensive but proven materials such as boron and titanium, and the wing box area, which had caused problems in the 111, was to be doubly strengthened against any failure. 2 turbofan engines would provide speed and economy, and 2 separate fins would ensure aircraft stability should one engine fail. Model 303 would carry the widest weapon spectrum of any anti-aircraft vehicle then in service. It would start with an M61 cannon for close encounters and dogfighting, the traditional short and medium-range Sidewinder and Sparrow missiles, and include the long-range, deadly accurate Phoenix weapon. The concept behind Model 303 would be an abject lesson to all aircraft builders faced with the same problem of having to produce an aircraft that in one step would not only bring them into line with enemy weaponry, but also, because of the cost of development, would ensure that one single plane could maintain a competitive edge for years to come. A crew of 2 would still be necessary because of the complexity of the weapon systems. But more than that, in a dogfighting mode, a second pair of eyes had proved useful with the F-4 experience. To maximize this, a one-piece bubble canopy placed very high up on the plane fuselage would allow both crew members optimum visibility. The lessons from the abortive F-111B having been learned well. However, the 111B had demonstrated that only the use of variable geometry could provide the flexibility within one aircraft to perform several roles. But an innovation not seen on any previous models was the provision of a glove vane, which could automatically be projected on the side of the wings to enhance maneuverability at high Mach numbers. Having produced an airframe which was highly innovative, Grumman initially relied upon already proven TF-30 engines to get their aircraft into the sky. These power plants were in service elsewhere and a known commodity. However, Model 303, right from its early design stages, had allowed for substantially improved power plants to be fitted with very little modification as soon as they became available. By adopting this something new, something proved mix, Grumman succeeded in reducing the risks without limiting the potential of their brainchild. Minor modifications allowed much more substantial engines to upgrade the aircraft as a matter of routine. The overall accessibility of 303 was maximized by providing a fuselage that was almost totally surrounded by quick opening panels, so that servicing in the limited and difficult environment of a carrier at sea could be achieved with maximum effectiveness. Similar to Grumman's approach to the power plants was their attitude towards the avionics package. Here too they chose to use an established design to expedite the production of the early aircraft. However, as more sophisticated avionics became available, the early models could be retrofitted easily. By December 21, 1970, the prototype, now referred to as the F-14 and named Tomcat, was ready for its maiden flight at Calverton, New York. Test pilots Bob Smythe and Bill Miller had to wait all day for final adjustments, and it was only in the late afternoon, with the threat of snow the following day, that they finally got aircraft number 1 into the air. The flight lasted only 10 minutes and was generally uneventful. Both pilots said that though they had only a short flight, the Tomcat behaved well. The next day, the weather broke, and it would be 9 days before it was deemed safe to fly the Tomcat again. This time, Miller was to take the front position and Bob Smythe the rear, and this flight was to be anything but uneventful. Prototype number 1 had not been in the air long when its chase plane noticed what seemed to be smoke coming from the aircraft. In fact, it was hydraulic oil leaking under pressure. Within minutes, all of the controlling surfaces of the plane ceased to function as the pilots made their approach through the cold morning air. A mere 100 feet from the ground, when there was no likelihood that the aircraft would reach the runway, the pilots ejected. 4 seconds later, Prototype 1 ceased to be. This is how it looked from the ground camera recording the event. Prototype number 2 was rushed forward. This aircraft was allocated the task of testing the Tomcat's performance at low speed and carrying ordnance. But in the light of the loss of number 1, it now had a radically increased workload. To assist achieving these new goals, in-flight refueling was employed very early in the program, thus enabling one aircraft to stay aloft for hours of strenuous appraisal. At the same time, ground testing of other prototypes continued throughout the day and night in order to bring the program up to schedule. In late August, another aircraft originally scheduled as number 12, now to be redesignated 1X as a replacement of the ill-fated original prototype, was wheeled out of Grumman's Calverton plant. And this plane would take over the high-speed testing role. By now, Smythe, Miller, and the other test pilots had established a real affinity with what Grumman were convinced was the real answer to the Navy's problem. But still, opposition manufacturers and the natural pessimism of Congress had yet to be overcome. And whilst the Navy had confidence in the Tomcat concept, there were still many trials ahead. Because at no stage was Model 303 to be a cheap aircraft. The sorts of money invested and the commitment necessary were already putting Grumman under considerable pressure. The company, naturally, was proud of having developed what was undoubtedly a major breakthrough. Here, a senior Defense Department official is being given a close-up inspection of the features of Prototype 1X and a personal tour over the intricate cockpit layout by Miller. Throughout 1971, ground-based testing of the first prototypes continued. These aircraft were put through severe testing when little was known about how they would react. Here is prototype number 2 with a complete ordnance load, achieving the almost unachievable. Here it is again, affecting an induced stall test. Throughout the entire prototype program, several aircraft were made with no intention of ever being flown. Their sole role was to be tested to destruction, as seen here. By this method, it was hoped that any flaws in design or manufacture would be identified. Prior to carrier testing, a prototype was catapult tested, and on June 28, 1972, the first Tomcat flown by a Navy pilot was to land on the aircraft carrier Forrestal on duty off Norfolk. After a series of touch and goes, the landing was effected by aircraft number 10. But within minutes, a small malfunction, a leak in the hydraulics of the nose gear, appeared. The two pilots were informed. On hand as a minor adjustment was made was Bill Miller. But the look on the faces of the Navy's test pilots said everything. This film you are seeing now was to be flown to the Congressional Committee for a final decision on the Tomcat within hours. As it happened, the committee gave the project its endorsement. But Bill Miller's luck was to run out 24 hours later when flying the same aircraft, number 10, he was to make a minor technical oversight. He and the plane were lost. But the program had to continue, and by late '72, full-scale production was in progress. The Tomcat was no longer a prototype. Rather, it was to be the Navy's fighter for the future. The Tomcat was still undergoing development in its weapons systems. It was to demonstrate the most spectacular achievement of any fighter aircraft with Operation 6 on 6.
Tower, Bloodhound 204, taxi 1, revetment storming area. Up number 1284, 1.5 en route. Alternate will be China Lake 0+20.
204, taxi runway 21. Magoo altimeter 3004. Time 1440 straight up. 204, taxi across runway 27.
Roger. Tower, Bloodhound 204 is ready for takeoff.
204, the wind is light and variable. Switch assigned departure control frequency. You're cleared for takeoff.
Magoo departure, Bloodhound 204.
starboard to 240.
Roger, coming starboard 240.
The objective was to demonstrate the effectiveness of the Hughes Phoenix missile system when attacking 6 different targets at one time. To do this, 2 air-launched drones, which would represent enemy fighter aircraft at supersonic speed, 3 obsolete training aircraft, which would represent larger enemy bombers, and 1 Mark II supersonic land-based drone, which would represent a launched missile, were sacrificed in the cause of presenting the Tomcat with an horrendous array of targets. With Navy crew at the controls, each of the 6 targets were individually identified on the radar scope and allocated a Phoenix.
Fox 1, 1's away. 2's in the air. 3's in the air. 4's in the air. Check the target cameras.
4th missile in the air. Target cameras on.
5's in the air. 6's in the air.
At one time, all 6 Phoenix were in the air, streaking towards their individual targets, which could have been up to a range of 50 miles away. As it happens, only 4 of the 6 were destroyed, but this was due entirely to a malfunction in the 2 drones. The information collected proved conclusively that even under 6-to-1 odds, the Phoenix Tomcat combination had a success rate of 80% or better. The first 2 squadrons to carrier-deploy Tomcats were VF-1 Wolfpack and VF-2 Bounty Hunters, and with their induction, the Navy now had in one plane an answer to the missile threat and an advanced dogfighter. Every landing is a new experience, even for veteran pilots. Placing 80,000 pounds and $40 million worth of high technology onto a few hundred square feet of deck takes its toll on men and machinery alike. Undercarriages and airframe have to come to terms with phenomenal stress, and sometimes not always with the desired result. Here a Tomcat hits the deck of the Forrestal and the undergear gave way. Still containing fuel and probably armament, this aircraft has effectively blocked the landing approach to all other aircraft and must be quickly removed. A gantry hoists the crippled plane up for removal. Firefighters and medical teams stand by. The entire complement is well aware of the devastation an exploding aircraft could create. The plane is secured, a source of jubilation to at least one of the deck crew. The flight crew leave the scene almost routinely. During September 1976 in the North Atlantic, 2 other airmen were even luckier. Their Tomcat was parked in the ready position on the carrier John F. Kennedy when suddenly it lunged across the deck and fell into the ice-cold sea. The pilots were able to eject, but the Tomcat fell to the watery depths. Underwater salvage experts were brought from Germany to retrieve its crushed carcass, rather than risk it falling into the hands of Soviet spy boats, which witnessed the entire event. The reason for the Navy going to such lengths was not merely to protect the secrets of the Tomcat. That would have been sufficient reason alone. But the Navy also wanted to ensure that the missilery carried at the time did not fall into Soviet hands. The Tomcat's major role should never be considered as an aircraft alone. It is a combination of airframe, avionics, and missilery. The components come together to form a lethal package, a complete weapon system. Miramar Naval Air Base is Fighter Town, the home of the famous Top Gun Trophy contest. Here, pilots are given an opportunity to pace their F-14s against other aircraft specially modified to resemble the flying characteristics of potential Soviet adversaries. These aircraft are often lighter and extremely maneuverable. This Tomcat crew, probably already with considerable experience, will have to set their wits and their machines against pilots who are veterans of combat in one or even more theaters. Here, a modified A4 Mongoose and a modified T-38 will compete with a Tomcat. The T-38 is virtually a flying legend of nimbleness and should ordinarily easily outmaneuver an aircraft of F-14 bulk. But the Tomcat's technology and the constant training of its crew have set new parameters for this type of dogfight. The Tomcat is not only required to excel in exercise, but also to compete and win when the game is real, as it did over the Gulf of Sidra in August 1981. A Hawkeye reconnaissance plane from a carrier deployed in exercises off Libya observed Libyan airspace for a potential threat. Tensions were high as both sides had previously tested each other to the brink. On this day, the patrolling Hawkeye detected two fighters traveling at high speed towards the carrier. They were later identified as Su-22s. High in the sky, the Hawkeye conveyed its vital information back to the carrier's control, and two patrolling Tomcats were sent to intercept. The two sets of aircraft approached each other at high speed. Suddenly, one of the SUs launched a missile, which fell far short of the American planes. This aggressive act had to be countered, and there was no more suitable aircraft to do so than a Tomcat. The first aircraft allowed its prey to pass by before it completely reversed its position. Then it came upon the ill-placed 22 and quickly dispatched it. The second Tomcat was only moments behind, identifying its prey, which had veered west and attempted to drop to a lower position. Seconds after the first Su-22 was destroyed, its companion was to suffer the same fate. With the assistance of fleet refuel, American carriers can be replenished and kept at sea for months on end, enabling naval strategists to bring aerial firepower within range of trouble spots around the world. The Second World War, Korea, Vietnam and Libya all demonstrated the importance of having this flexibility. But it's only with the development of the Tomcat that the Navy can be sure that its floating runways are impervious to attack. Tomcats, like all naval aircraft, have to be able to function at combat status in any climate and many environments. As Tomcat pilots would say, it's anywhere, any weather, and